you're ready.
Thanks, John, and thanks everyone for having me on to talk to you today. I am excited to be able to share this project. The Nature Conservancy has been developing this tool for the past 3 years or so, and we are just now rolling it out as we've completed our grant from NYSERDA that funded the project. And some of you may have seen previous presentations we've done about this or attended a workshop, but I hope to go into some detail about the invasive species applications of the tool specifically and show you some of the data that we have loaded. But first I'll just give an overview of the tool itself. The Natural Resource Navigator is intended to focus specifically on climate change adaptation for New York. And we know that climate change is going to increase our uncertainty about our natural resources in the future. We can expect more floods, but also more drought, rising sea levels, and shifting species ranges that all are going to require us to change the way that we manage natural resources and help them adapt to these new conditions. And what we find when we look at how people are preparing for climate change is that efforts to plan for climate change often get stuck in the planning phase due to a lot of uncertainty or lack of information about what to prepare for and how to adapt. And so the Conservancy developed the Navigator to try to address this problem, to deliver the information that decision makers need to think about where and when to implement particular adaptation strategies and help move out of the planning phase and into implementation. And the Navigator is really designed for folks like all of you on the phone, people who are working in natural resource management, professionals who are working in federal agencies, state agencies, nonprofits, and also at the municipal level. And really focused on information about New York, streams and forests in particular. The Navigator can be used to do general assessments of climate risk to those habitats or to species in the state. It can be used to identify places to implement various kinds of adaptation actions and develop detailed implementation plans. It can be applied at various scales, and we've given a couple examples of some applications that we think the Navigator would be useful for, both at the local level for specific projects and also for looking statewide at the best places to implement different kinds of adaptation strategies. The website for the tool is live, so anyone could go check it out right now if they want to. The website is naturalresourcenavigator.org, and we have a homepage that provides information about the project and gives you the link to launch the mapping tool itself. And this is just a list of some of the things that are going to be available on that website, including the raw data that we have created or links to third-party data that we've used. That's kind of being loaded this summer, and so we hope to have those downloads available soon. And we're developing case studies that people could hopefully use to share how they've applied the tool and help build learning across the community. When you click on the Launch Map tool, big orange arrow that's featured on the website, it launches the web map tool itself, which has a couple of different entry points. If you are interested in a particular type of natural resource, you could jump into those tools, or you can explore the map in general. And within the map tool, we have a detailed map layer tree with a lot of spatial data that's been kind of organized and interpreted to help support adaptation planning. And then we also have two applications, the Species Explorer and the Habitat Explorer, that can be used to kind of generate summaries of those data without having to dig into all of the raw data in detail. We also have built a guidebook that's intended to be a companion and used alongside the map tool to really help walk through the planning process of climate adaptation planning and step-by-step guide how to use the tool and some worksheets to help think about how to interpret the data and develop adaptation plans. So definitely encourage anyone who's using the tool to bring up the guidebook and read through that before you dive in too deeply to the detailed map layers. The data that we have loaded on the tool, as I mentioned, a lot of it is relevant to streams and forests, and it is organized in that way. We also have a big collection of species data. And it's organized into information about the current condition of those resources, a separate folder containing information on various future threats and kind of predicting what we think the condition of those systems will be in 2050. And then we have climate change specific information about the sensitivity of those resources to climate change, their exposure to climate change based on climate change projections about actual changes in things like precipitation and temperature. And I wanted to dive into a little bit of the invasive species data that we have loaded in order to kind of show you some of the information that hopefully would be useful to projects that you are working on. So I'm going to move over to try to show the tool live. Hopefully this will work. We tested it earlier. Let me just bring that up. So hopefully everyone can see the homepage for the Natural Resource Navigator. And I won't go into detail about what's here, but I definitely encourage folks to check out all the resources on this web page that are intended to be used alongside the mapping tool. When you launch the tool itself, I'm going to go into Explore the Map so that we can look at some of the detailed data layers. Most of what we have on invasive species is specific to forest invasives. We did not have the capacity to bring in really any information about stream or wetland or grassland really invasives. So a lot of the information in here will be most useful to people working in forest areas. But if there's a lot of interest in building on those resources, we could be interested in adding more on those other types of invasives in the future. Well, within forests, we wanted to look at kind of where we currently have problems with invasives in our forested areas that might be good to address and restore or control in order to help those systems weather climate change as best as they can. So restoration and kind of classic conservation can be an important part of climate change adaptation by kind of removing those past harms and giving the system this best chance of dealing with what's coming. And so we wanted to look at, as I said, where we have invasive problems currently. And we use data from the Forest Service from their Phase 2 Plus data collection in the Forest Inventory and Analysis Program. And this is a new suite of data that the Forest Service is collecting that allows us to look at invasive species abundance within forest stands. And because of the density of the data, we were only able to show this rolled up to the county level. But we did look at, for the data that we have, where there was very high both abundance and frequency of invasives detected in these forest stands. And looking at that at the county level, that gives us a sense of where there's kind of a high likelihood that forests in that area are currently experiencing problems with invasive species. And so that's what this map is showing. When we think about the future problems with invasives, we know that invasives are going to spread and that climate change is probably going to make that more of a problem for many species, that we're going to have invasives spreading to areas where they don't currently occur, and we may have new invasives coming in that aren't currently on our radar in New York. And that latter set we were not able to develop detailed models for, but we do have a watch list of those species that we've drafted based on available information. But the data that is in the map are mostly focused on species that we already have in New York and looking at kind of what places are more vulnerable to spread of those species. And so again, looking at the FIA data and in combination with a query of the IMAP invasives database, we looked at where we have a lot of species present, invasive species present in the counties as an indicator of kind of where we have higher risk. So even if the forests in these areas aren't already invaded, places that have just a greater number of different species present in the county are probably at greater risk of experiencing new invasions by those species. And so this map, again, at the county level is just indicating where we have kind of a higher likelihood of future invasive problems either being introduced or getting worse. When we think about pests and pathogens specifically, and this is based on a list of 8 pests and pathogens that were developed looking at the literature, kind of which ones are most likely to be causing harm to our forests. The USDA already has models of the potential impact of a lot of pests and pathogens, and so we drew on that data to basically show the probability of loss of basal area due to the combination of all of these 8 pests and pathogens in combination. And so this map is showing in the red the places that by 2027 are at risk of losing over 25% of their current basal area due to forest pests. And we also show the breakdown of the individual species. So this is the combination of all of those high-risk species that we included, and then we have each species individually as well. And so that's all of the risk maps here are pulled directly from that USDA database. But in addition, we know that that this USDA modeling was done without including climate change, and while we were not able to do specific climate change-based modeling of future extent of or vulnerability to these pests, we did want to look at where we might be vulnerable without doing that specific modeling. And so we pulled in data on host tree abundance from the Forest Service. These are models that are done at the 250-meter scale. And I believe they're available nationally, but we've included just this area. And basically showing what proportion of the canopy is being contributed by the host species for various pests to give a sense of where, if the species were able to spread to that area, how much impact it might have. So it's a little bit of a coarse indicator, but it helps us give a sense of where we might want to be on the lookout for species that aren't currently in those areas or even modeled to be there by 2027, independent of climate change. So that's the invasive specific data, but I also wanted to show you some of our other data that might be helpful for planning for invasives under climate change. We do have our climate sensitivity and exposure maps, which we have for forests, but also for streams for people who are working in aquatic systems. And the forest sensitivity is based on a variety of indicators, but can be rolled up to a general score that gives a sense of how sensitive the forests in a given area are likely to be to climate change. So how much they are likely to be impacted and not able to adapt or adjust to extreme conditions. And so that's what that map is showing. But it's useful to look at that in combination with the exposure to climate change, which is again based on specific climate variables that we felt were relevant to forest systems. And the forest exposure data is based on modeling done by Cornell Climate Center, and is the same data that's now available through the Climate Change Clearinghouse. That's been another product funded by NYSERDA that was just rolled out recently. And so people who want to explore the climate data in more detail, I recommend using the Climate Change Clearinghouse because they have more ability to play with different models and scenarios. But this is our assessment rolling up one particular scenario to 2050. And when you combine exposure and sensitivity, it gives you a sense of your overall climate risk. And we've highlighted both high and low climate risk areas. And so as you can see here, this is the highest climate risk map. And so these are the places that have both high exposure and high sensitivity to climate change. And the color coding is used to indicate what types of strategies are most likely to be needed in those areas. So the green are places that are currently in good condition and don't have a high degree of threat from, things like invasives and land use change. And so those are places that we can focus on maintaining and just monitoring and watching for unexpected changes. Places that are in blue, which we don't have a lot of, there's some up here, for example, are places that are currently in good condition but do have high threat. And so we need to think about mitigating those anticipated threats to help avoid decline in the future. And the orange, which we have a lot of in our New York forests, are places that are currently not meeting our criteria for good condition and that are likely to need some restoration in order to be prepared for climate change. And then the red are places that have both condition and high threat problems that are likely to require a lot of investment and ongoing management. And again, this is just highlighting those with the highest climate change risk. But we can also look at those places that have the lowest risk, which might be good places to focus in terms of having very predictable or more predictable outcomes of our management. The climate is likely to be less of a wild card in these places, and while we still need to think about climate change, they maybe are more secure investments using our traditional practices, as opposed to the high-risk areas where we need to be thinking more explicitly about climate adaptation. And we do have all the climate data. What I showed you was, kind of rolled up and scored, but we do have the raw data on temperature change, precipitation change, and extreme precipitation for people who are planning for particular outcomes that want to know, specifically how many degrees, how many, is this going to get drier or wetter? And so we do provide that kind of more detailed data for those who want it. So that's a very quick overview of the types of things we have in the tool. And we also have lots of other data, as I said, on streams, as well as information on protected areas, ecosystem services like carbon storage. We have a land use change model for people who are thinking about development risk and impacts of development. And then a large collection of species data, which I will just show you quickly how to access using our Species Explorer, which summarizes over 800 species distribution models to these hexagons to give you kind of a quick summary of what species you are potentially going to see in that area. And so, for example, if you click on a hexagon, it generates a species list, which you can then filter based on ones that are there, predicted to be there currently versus in 2050. Looking at just increasing or decreasing species, special designations like the species of greatest conservation need that are in the State Wildlife Action Plan, or rare species that are tracked by the Heritage Program, filtering by habitat associations or by taxa. And for a given species, if you were to click on it, find a good example here. Let's pick up a rare one. If you were to click on a species, you can look at its individual species distribution map, for example, bog turtle, and it color codes by areas that are expected to decline and then areas that are expected to increase in suitability, and also gives some detailed data on the climate vulnerability and status of that species. And that data is also downloadable into a spreadsheet if you wanted to look at the full collection in one big spreadsheet. So just to go back to the presentation, I'm just going to jump ahead past all of the screenshots. And for anyone who's interested, this is the list of invasives that were included in all of that mapping. And this is the list of pests and pathogens that we prioritized and are included. So just to let you know kind of our future plans for this project, we're doing a lot of presentations like this one to get the word out about this tool being available. We're looking for case studies, so anyone who has a project that they think might be a good application for the tool, we would love to work with you on kind of seeing how well the tool works and writing up kind of lessons learned to share with others. We are looking for what kinds of improvements or additions would be desirable to add to the tool in the future. And so we would love feedback as people start to play with it, what you like, what you don't like. And you can contact myself or my colleague Kristen France, who co-led the project, at any time, or use our feedback form on the website. So I'm happy to take questions if there's time. Otherwise, please check it out and